Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Booker Houston. I go by Liz, and I am so excited to be here today moderating a conversation. And today I have the pleasure of connecting with two categorically amazing women. First up, we have Executive Vice President and Strategic Relations for the National Basketball Players Association, Chrysa Chin. Chrysa, hello. How are you?
Hi, Liz. It's nice to be here. Nina, great to see you and looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much. And we also have licensed marriage and family therapist and founder of B'nai by Nina, Nina Westbrook. Hi, Nina. How are you?
Hi, Liz. It's good to see you. Hi, Chrysa. I'm really looking forward to having this important conversation.
Well, thank you both. We'll go ahead and dive right into our discussion. First, we're going to talk a bit about misogynoir, what it is, how we've experienced it. And so just to define misogynoir for the audience out there, this is when we're talking about where misogyny and racism intersects. And so we're talking in particular about misogyny as it affects Black women, and we also see women of color included in that category. And I wondered if either of you could give examples of when you have experienced misogynoir and had to address it.
I definitely feel like if with the age of social media, something we can all probably relate to. If you're active, I know, Liz, you're probably active on social media since you're content creating. This idea and the narrative around how we communicate and what we share and what we say on social media, I find it to be quite interesting how people feel that they have the right to say just about anything on social media, but in personal experiences, when I've expressed or acknowledged or shared my viewpoints, whether it be a counter viewpoint to something that I saw or something that someone was sharing on my social media account, the type of pushback and the type of, I'm going to say just a response. It's almost like I have the audacity to say something and to speak on my own self or my own family, in the capacity in which I have, which is typically me calling out something that I see that I know is not true or something I know that's wrong. And I feel like there have been so many instances where it's almost as though my voice is not important, and even in my own space, in my own life. And like, how can I have the audacity to say something? Or it's considered a rant, or it's considered and given and labeled as to be something negative rather than just me voicing my opinion, the same as everyone else on social media. So I feel like that's something that we could probably all relate to and have experienced.
Yeah,
So thank you for that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Chrysa. You can jump right in.
No, I was just going to jump in with a couple of examples, even just in the, sort of in the workplace. So, being referred to as aggressive because I state my point of view or defend my points just directly, right? And so, it was commented one time that Chrysa is so aggressive, and that colleague was corrected, for saying that, and other colleagues as well for saying that were corrected, and told that, I was not aggressive, that I was assertive, and that had I not been a woman and a Black woman, that would not have been said. And then in another, in a similar example, it was thought that I should not take a trip to a certain country because of race and gender. And so, it's just sort of interesting when you play it back and you think about, from where that comes in the history, and just people's ability to accept that, as opposed to leading and saying, no, this is the representative for, our company or this issue or this matter. So this is in her purview, and this is what she's going to do, and we are going to send her. And if they want to do business with us, then they will accept her and treat her accordingly. But that sometimes is not done.
Thank you so much for sharing that. What I'm hearing from the both of you is definitely this dehumanization aspect of it, right? Reducing us from being human beings to almost being objects and not worthy of the sort of respect that we see, especially white men would give to other white men. This is making me think about an episode of Scandal. I love that show. I love Shonda Rhimes. I think she's an amazing writer, very talented. And there was a scene where Olivia Pope addresses being called the word bitch. And she says, if I were a man, you would say I were smart or formidable or right. The words that we use to talk about women. And I think specifically when it comes to Black women, that comes up. And so when you talk about being called aggressive, those sorts of labels that are unfairly placed upon us, when in any other context and said by someone of a different gender and a different race, would be seen as something to aspire to rather than something to look down on. So I thank you both for sharing your experiences with that. And I just wonder, what kind of misogynoir do you notice this election cycle? I know particularly for me, I'm having trouble with the way people talk about Kamala sleeping her way to the top in an elected position. And I do feel like that is misogynoir and not simply just misogyny. I think that her being a Black woman does have something to do with that because of the way people are talking. It just doesn't make sense. I saw a young man ask a woman who said that Kamala had slept her way to the top. He said, how many of those people did she have to sleep with to get their votes, right? Like, it doesn't make any sense. And it's just another form of misogynoir. And so I just wonder if either of you have seen any other aspects of misogynoir in this election cycle. And that could be either directed at Kamala or even directed at Black women who are supporting Kamala for president.
I think it's safe to say we've seen so many instances of the dehumanizing of Kamala throughout this election and throughout the race. And I think that with that, even in the therapy community, I feel like as soon as the news broke that Kamala was going to be running for president, I initially had a lot of fear. The emotions and the feelings that came up for me, and I know this is similar to a lot of other mental health professionals, were how are we going to get through this election and maintain our mental health and have to be exposed to so much of the name calling and the negative feedback and the misogynoir that we're talking about. This is going to be what Kamala is going to go through, is going to be something that we as Black women are all going to be going through together. And I just, through anticipation of what this was going to look like for all of us and what that meant and everything that we were going to kind of have to take on and put on our shoulders as the country kind of goes through this election cycle and what that meant for Black women in particular. That was actually one of my first concerns, or one of the first things that came up for me once I found out that Kamala was running for president. It's just something that's sort of built into our experience, and it's definitely, it's definitely at the forefront when we consider that a Black woman is running for the highest position in our country.
Yeah.
I think, I've seen some of the examples. I mean, somebody referenced it. We were talking about it a little bit, before we were on camera, but, the shirts that say Trump or tramp, or, which is disgraceful, or just sort of the ridiculing of, of her name or her appearance. Even as much as I love comedy, I mean, even I think some of the comedians are out of line in the way in which they do it, because it's not just about being funny. I mean, I can laugh all day, but it's sort of the types and the way that the fun is poked and it's seated. to me in racism that permeates this country in many ways. So, I mean, there are examples of it all the time. Like she can't breathe for somebody looking for something to pick on her about, and it all, in my view at least, all goes back to racism. And I'm not one of those people who says, oh, everything is racism, because I don't do that. But you think about, when you thread it back, exactly where it's coming from, and it's blatant racism. And people, I think now, some people, when you look at some of the things that are said, whether you're listening to the news or comments or certain shows, news shows, people just have this confidence, and there's this audacity and sort of almost this license to be disrespectful and dismissive to her, as though she's not capable or qualified to hold the office, versus that idiot, who's her running mate. And I do think he's an idiot. And I am one who, there are times when it's not about, the party, because there are times when I have agreed with the Republican platform, on certain issues, but even Republicans are running away from him. So, because he's an embarrassment, and you've heard, many of them comment on the inappropriateness of some of, not only Donald Trump's comments, but just, his supporters, the way in which they have almost villainized her. So,
Yeah, and I think that, Black women in this country are some of the most underappreciated. We're probably the most underappreciated group of people, and I think that the constant name calling and innuendos and things that we're really have grown so accustomed to have been normalized, and it's been done so often as an attempt to normalize that this is how Black women should or can be treated, and to make it seem as though this is right or this is okay behavior. And what I think about is, when I see the world through the lens of my kids, who I don't really speak to them about politics. And just a couple of days ago, they came home talking to me about Kamala and Trump. And one of the first things that came out of my son's mouth is, I'm not voting for Donald Trump. I'm going to vote for Kamala because Trump, he's a liar. And at the end of the day, I feel as though, everyone, you can look at what's happening and the behavior of adults, and you can see things to be right or wrong through your own moral compass and the scope of how you feel and what you think is good and bad. But for me, when I look at the climate of this election and how things have been going, and I look at it through the eyes of my young children, it just seems so clear and evident as to right and wrong. And at the end of the day, if we simplify things in that way, it's easier to come to conclusions and ideas that are all the complicated ideas that are surrounding this election cycle.
Yeah, I think, just thank you again, both of you. You've hit so many great points, and I love, Nina, that your son just had an automatic reaction to knowing this is not
He
right. And I
did.
think that speaks volumes.
He did. And it's so, I had to explain to him. Yeah, I had to explain to him that he wasn't old enough to vote. But and then he started asking me about who I was voting for. And it just became a whole conversation between my daughters and my son. And even, it made me really happy to know. I don't know where he got this information from, but it seemed quite accurate. And it just made me happy to know that he was standing more for what he knows to be right versus wrong, rather than what Donald Trump looks like or what Kamala Harris looks like. And so that,
Yes.
was really encouraging to me that we're on the right path with our kids, at least.
I think that's excellent. And my son's only 4, so I hope I can go in the right direction with him. But Chrysa, I appreciate what you
My
said,
son's
especially bringing up
29.
comedians.
I was just
What
gonna
was that?
I was gonna say my son is 29 and he's definitely voting for Kamala. He's
I love it.
made
I
sure
love it. I love it.
he was registered as soon as, like my mother did me, as soon as you turn 18, buddy, you're hitting the polls. So
Yep.
Yes. Yes. But I appreciated, Chrysa, what you brought up about comedians. And as a comedian, I take it very seriously. As a comedian who regularly impersonates Kamala Harris in a show, because I do that in a show called Washington Roast, where we impersonate comedians and we roast each other. And I think a lot about my comedy, which is not politically correct in any form or fashion, but I don't like the concept of punching down. And so while I'm not politically correct, I do like flipping the script. And one way that I've been consistently referring to Donald Trump to get people to think about things in a different fashion is I call him a 2-time popular vote losing reality show ho. I call him a reality show ho. That's how I have referred to him, because I want people to understand that man was on a reality show. We know about his own sexual dating history, but it's not flung at him the same way that Kamala Harris is. Great. She was in a relationship with, Montel years ago. What's wrong with two single people being together and dating
yeah,
at some point? I think Montel actually spoke to it. He was like, yes, we dated. What's the big deal? Two single people wanted to go out with each other. And so it is interesting to try to use comedy for good, to punch up rather than punch down, and try to find some way to get people to really think about these stereotypes and why they apply to one class of people and not another, especially when it comes to misogynoir. And I think something else that comes up is politicians, we do want to hold them accountable. At the end of the day, Kamala Harris is now and hopefully will continue to be a public servant. That is her job. We should be critical. We should be holding them accountable. But at what point does fair and just criticism just bleed into misogynoir? And I can give an example that weighs heavy on me is I don't like the way that folks blame her for issues for the entire justice system because of her history as a prosecutor. I do think that they are using a Black woman as a scapegoat for the entire justice system and to essentially punish her for doing her job. And I made a video about this online where I said, when you say that, well, perfectionism, by the way, is definitely a tenet of white supremacy, right? That you have to be perfect in order to be able to fulfill a role in society, right? But to say that she only could be a prosecutor if she met this impossible standard that completely went against the job, could get her disbarred, could make her lose her license, all of these things people wanted her to do that we don't expect of white male prosecutors at all. That's basically saying you don't want Black women in those spaces because it's an impossible standard to hold them to. And so that's just one example that I think of where that crosses a line into misogynoir and not really fair accountability of a public servant. And I wonder if either of you have any sort of, opinions about that or examples that you've seen of this.
I would just say, I have seen her be blamed for everything. She's blamed for the border. She's blamed for the cost of living, the crisis with inflation. She's blamed for any sort of issue that others are upset about. She's taking the blame under, she did nothing under the Biden administration. And I think back and I think back a little bit, not hyper specific, but to Trump's presidency. Like, in my view, Kamala had her head down and she was working and she was doing everything that she could. I mean, you did not see her. She was not as visible. But you think back, like what other vice presidents did you see that were hyper visible? So she's held to a different standard. And look, I am one who said it too. I did not know as much about her until she was running. I mean, sure, I knew her basic history. I voted for Biden for president, but I didn't know, I didn't know a ton about her. I didn't learn more about her until she was running, and I was hyper complimentary of, oh my goodness, she's brilliant. She has this idea, this thought, all of these things. But I hear everybody blame her for all these things and not being visible. And then I look back again at prior presidents who were not visible. They give only parts of the information of all of the things that they wish to be critical about, whether you're talking about the cost of living, or you're talking about the border, or you're talking about, whatever the issue, reproductive rights, whichever one we want to take on. Those that are being critical have never given all of the information about that, nor do they talk about those vice presidents that preceded her. So, I'm most annoyed about the border, the way that they're blaming her for the border. And then, all of the issues around gun violence, right? So, for me, for my family, it's something. I'm a mother. My son is 29. He's a Black male. I'm always worried about that. But you know what? Guess what? I have a gun too. So, and I am not anti-possession of a gun. I am anti guns getting into the hands of the wrong people and not having the proper, licensing procedures in place to make sure that they're not getting into the wrong hands. So I just, that is the thing that I've seen in this campaign most, that is just so disturbing, and I get so tired of it. And recently, Nina and I both were in Abu Dhabi, and one of the things that I do a lot when I travel abroad is I watch the news, because the news is delivered differently abroad than it is here. And you get different information and different views. And I will say this, you listen to, in any debate, Donald Trump talks about, how the other countries are laughing at us. And I have to say, no, they're not. They're laughing at him. They're ridiculing him in every way. And it is embarrassing. To the fact that he's even running, for president. I wish he would just step aside, but that's a different conversation. But anyway, that's what I've seen.
Just to kind of piggyback on that a little bit, you said something that I think is really important when it comes to misogynoir. We don't hear, I've only been voting since 2008. So the first president I got to vote for was President Obama. And yeah, it was very, very exciting. Anyhow, we're going to table that for now. But I can't think back at another time where the vice president was visible in that way, to where they caught all the flack and they were the recipient of all of the frustrations and negativity that was going on in the president's during the president's term. And so this to me just seems like another example of the misogynoir. I'll never say that word properly, but
it's okay. It's a gross word. So
I know, I feel like maybe it's something we don't need to say. We need to get away from that. But that's just what I was going to share about the standards being different for Kamala because of the fact that she's a Black woman and how that ties in.
Thank you for that. I agree with both of you. And again, like I said, I know I brought up the example of blaming her for the entire prosecutorial system in the United States, which is just wild to me, especially knowing that in her past, she was seen as soft on crime. I made several videos debunking misinformation about Kamala Harris. And one thing I made sure to do was I used news articles from the time at which things occurred. I didn't want anything that was ultra sanitized to make her look good. And I didn't want anything that was trying to demonize her. I wanted to see how they were actually speaking about her at the time. And at the time, she was seen as soft on crime. So to see misinformation like she prosecuted thousands of Black men for marijuana, when you find out it was only 45 people who saw jail time, and it was due to other offenses tied to the marijuana charges. And also, we don't even know the demographics of those people, right? We don't even know if they were all Black men. It was all kinds of folks. Finding that sort of misinformation and being able to rebut it with facts is very important. And that just brings me back into just the last bit of our discussion that I want to talk about. I feel like we could definitely talk in depth about this for some time. And that's just, as Black women, what are your top priorities for this election? Because I know for me and what I do in my work, definitely trying to combat misinformation and disinformation so that folks have the correct information. But I also think about what I'm looking for and what I'm hoping for and what I tell people I'm voting for is the Supreme Court. I think people need to understand that there are probably 2 Supreme Court seats that will get filled by the next president. And we know what impact the Supreme Court has had on, I mean, we've lost race-based affirmative action. We've lost reproductive rights. We have lost so much. And that's very frightening when you're seeing especially Black women now dying, preventable deaths due to abortion bans, and our education being impacted because of the way affirmative action was overturned and things like that. And so, folks tell me, well, how do you know that Kamala Harris will even put someone good on the Supreme Court? And I say, I've got 3 words for you: Ketanji Brown Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I know. That is how I know. And so for me, that's definitely my top priorities. And I just wonder what your top priorities are this election cycle.
Yeah, mine are definitely the Supreme Court. I think about it often. I'm very concerned about obviously the power of the Supreme Court and who is now occupying those seats. And we have got to make sure that we have responsible selections or appointments for those seats going forward. So it's definitely that. It is the economy. I am concerned about the economy. And I am concerned about safety. Once again, I mean, my safety, yes, my son's safety. I think, you all can relate as mothers. While my son is older, I have to worry about him and the license that people feel that they may have to attack him because of race. And so I am concerned about that, and I want to make sure that there are not people that are appointed or can otherwise affect him, in any sort of way that compromises his ability to live freely, the way that he's been living. So those are my main issues: public safety, my son's safety, which is, I'm sure I've underscored, and the other two things that I mentioned.
I fall right in line there. I feel like reproductive rights is a big one for me. Safety, gun right, like regulations and gun safety. Obviously, I have 3 small children, and it's traumatizing every single time there's some type of horrific event taking place involving guns at any school at any age. But obviously, I'm in it, and so that's a big issue for me. And also the economy and what that looks like for our youth and for our children as they get older, just the direction that we're going in, and the young people today after COVID and trying to figure out how to start their lives and how to have families and how to buy homes, and everything is so seemingly unattainable. I feel like that's a really big issue, and also um, how we approach mental health and the importance and significance of building that awareness. That's always going to remain important to me as well.
Well, thank you both so much. I mean, that's definitely a lot, and it all resonates with me. And also, as a mother, you talk about safety. Nina, I have a young child as well. I have the same concerns you do. I have a disabled child. So I know that if, God forbid, something were to happen, my son can't be quiet and hide and, do the things that they tell you to do in a school shooting, in those drills. And I think about that all the time. I think about how Donald Trump wants to dismantle the Department of Education, which would directly impact children like mine and other children who rely so heavily on the different services and protections provided. And it's all so multifaceted. We talk about the economy, and that goes right into reproductive rights. Abortion bans have a direct impact on upward mobility economically for women. And so this is all just what's rolling around in my brain, because I can just see all the little connections and things like that. And I feel what you guys are saying when you talk about these concerns and worries. And I just appreciate you both so much, and just thank you for having this conversation with me. And any final thoughts just before I close it out?
No, there's a lot at stake this election. I mean, again, I've been voting only since 2008. That was my first time getting to vote, but this feels like the most important election of my voting history and my life. So everyone get out and vote.
Yeah. Similarly, I would piggyback on that too and say just, I'm hoping that people are educating themselves around the issues and getting real information and getting out and casting their vote. My view is, and I'm not ashamed to say it, I'm voting for Kamala. I believe that she's the one who can propel this country forward, and create a safe environment for men, women, children, others. I mean, this country has built itself on on being sort of the land of the free, and I'd like to see it become that again, but the land of the free and the land of the safe. um would be my wish. So I'm hoping that folks get out and vote, and also just to get away from this notion of, I don't like either of them, so I'm not voting. I mean, people have got to move away from that. Your vote is your voice, and if you don't vote, you are helping this country spiral into destruction.
Absolutely.
Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley said something very profound to me a few weeks ago, and that was, perfection is not on the ballot, but progress certainly is.
Yes.
And I think about that, and I think about that all the time. So, ladies, I just want to thank you for holding space with me for this conversation. And just want to remind everybody watching that early voting is happening right now in most states. And we want to encourage you to support Black women with your vote. The initiatives, amendments, the candidates on the ballot will all determine the policies and laws that we see rolled out. And so we want to ensure that the people elected into office care about those laws and bring about the advancement and health of Black women. And so just want to thank everyone. Thank you again, Nina and Chrysa, and I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.